The forest whispered under the silver light of the full moon. Shadows stretched long between the trees, bending and twisting with the wind. Lyra moved silently, her feet brushing the soft moss, heart pounding with fear and defiance. Behind her, Kale's presence was unmistakable, though he stayed hidden, watching her every step. Lyra had escaped the palace, but she was not free. Danger followed her like a silent storm. The shadowy faction that sought to use her blood for power had not given up, and Kale, the Alpha King, pursued her, not to claim her, but because he could not bear the thought of losing her. She paused by a small clearing, the moonlight spilling over her face. Her breathing slowed, but her mind raced. She did not fully understand the power within her blood, only that it was alive, pulsing, and calling to her. Something ancient stirred within her veins, a force both protective and dangerous. "You cannot run from me." Kale's voice came softly from the shadows, though he did not step into the clearing. Lyra's eyes narrowed, defiance flaring. "I do not belong to you," she said, her voice strong despite the tremor in her heart. "And I will not be controlled." Kale stepped forward, his eyes reflecting the moonlight like twin storms. "I do not seek to control you," he said. "I seek only to protect you, from them, and from yourself." Lyra shook her head. "I am not weak," she whispered. "I can protect myself." Kale studied her, the fire of her spirit mirrored in his own gray eyes. He had faced countless enemies, ruled kingdoms, and survived betrayals, yet nothing had ever struck him so deeply as her defiance. He had believed he understood power and dominance, but Lyra was different. She did not fear him, and for the first time in decades he feared something, not for himself but for her. The sound of leaves rustling drew their attention. From the darkness, 3 figures emerged, cloaked in black, their eyes glinting with malice. They moved with purpose, their hands reaching for Lyra. Kale stepped in front of her, a living shield. The energy between them, the tether of destiny, flared as Lyra felt a pulse from within her blood. Shadows around them shivered, twisting and curling, responding to her presence. She did not understand the power fully, but instinct guided her. "Stay behind me," Kale said, his voice low but commanding. "No," Lyra said, stepping forward. "I can help." Before Kale could protest, she lifted her hands, feeling the energy rise. A silvery light burst from her palms, swirling like smoke and wind. The intruders stumbled back, shielding their eyes from the sudden brilliance. Kyle's eyes widened, not in fear, but in awe. The power within her blood was awakening, and it was magnificent. With a swift motion, Kale moved beside her. Together they stood, not as master and servant, but as equals, their movements synchronized. The attackers faltered, unable to break the force between them. And in that moment, something shifted. The tension, the defiance, the desire. It all became part of a single truth. They were stronger together. When the intruders finally fled into the forest shadows, Lyra exhaled deeply. Her hands trembled, but she smiled faintly. "I did not expect that," she said. Kale turned to her, his expression softened by admiration and something else, something vulnerable he had not allowed himself to feel in years. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said, "and more magnificent." Lyra's cheeks flushed, not from flattery but from a strange recognition that he no longer saw her as property, as someone to dominate. He saw her as she was, powerful, unbroken, alive. For the next days they journeyed together through the forests and hills surrounding the palace. Lyra learned to channel her magic more intentionally. She discovered she could sense danger before it arrived, and her control over shadows and wind grew with each passing night. Kale taught her strategy and combat, but more importantly, he taught her trust. Not the trust of submission, but the trust of partnership. Kale's obsession began to transform. The desire to claim her was replaced by a need to understand her, to honor her strength. And Lyra, in turn, began to see past the rigid alpha, discovering the man beneath, the one haunted by a curse and a kingdom, but capable of loyalty, compassion, and even love. One evening, they reached a cliff overlooking the palace. The lights of the city shimmered like stars beneath them, and the wind carried the scent of distant fires. Lyra sat at the edge, her legs dangling over the stone, the moonlight painting her hair silver. "You could have returned to the palace," she said, voice soft. "You could have forced me to stay." Kyle stood beside her, silent for a long moment. "I could," he admitted. "But that would make me no better than those who sold you. And I am not that man. I am not a king who rules with chains." Lyra turned to him, studying his profile against the moon. "Then why did you chase me?" Kale's gray eyes met hers, stormy yet tender. "Because I cannot let you walk away," he said. "Because your fire, it touches something in me I thought was dead. And because I do not want to live in a world without you in it." Lyra felt her breath catch. For the first time, she did not feel fear in his presence. Only a tension that was no longer threatening but full of possibility. "Then we fight together," she said finally, her voice steady. "Not as Alpha and Omega, not as king and pawn, but as equals." Kale's lips curved into a faint, almost vulnerable smile. "As equals," he agreed. The moment passed, but the peace was fragile. The shadowy faction had not disappeared. Their power in the kingdom was growing, and they would not hesitate to strike again. Kale and Lyra returned to the palace in secret, planning their next move. Inside the throne room, Kale knelt before an ancient altar, tracing the runes carved into the stone. The palace had many secrets, and one was particularly old, a curse bound to the Alpha's bloodline. Only a bond forged through choice, trust, and mutual respect could break it. Lyra stepped beside him, her hand brushing his. The energy pulsed stronger than before, their magic intertwining not by force but by will. "This is it," Kale said, his voice almost a whisper. "This is the moment that can save us all, or destroy everything." Lyra nodded. "Then we face it together," she said. The next days were filled with preparation. They trained, strategized, and grew closer, not through ownership, but through shared struggle and shared victories. The tension between them softened, replaced with understanding, admiration, and a subtle, unspoken bond that neither dared to name yet. Finally, the day came when the shadowy faction struck. The palace shook with their assault, dark magic clashing with light, screams echoing through the halls. Lyra's magic surged, shielding Kale and the soldiers from harm. Together they pushed back the enemy, moving as one, fire and storm, shadow and steel. At the heart of the conflict, Kale faced the leader of the attackers, a sorcerer seeking the Alpha's death. The man raised his staff, dark energy coiling around him, but Kale met him with steady resolve. Lyra stepped forward, her hands glowing, the energy of her bloodline linking with his. Together, their power was unstoppable. The sorcerer fell, defeated, his magic dissipating into the night. When the battle ended, the palace was scarred but safe. Kyle and Lyra stood together, hands entwined, the night quiet except for the whispers of wind and the soft glow of the moon. "You were magnificent," Kyle said, his voice low, almost awed. "You saved me. You saved the kingdom." Lyra smiled faintly. "We saved it together." The tension, the defiance, the desire, it had not vanished, but it had transformed. What had begun as obsession and fear had grown into trust, respect, and a bond neither could deny. Kale had learned that true power was not in possession, but in love freely given. And Lyra had discovered that even a souled Omega could shape destiny and claim her own strength. Standing together under the moonlight, Kale whispered, "You belong to no one. Yet my heart will follow yours wherever it may roam." Lyra's hand tightened around his. "And I will choose to walk beside you," she said softly. The wind carried their shadows across the palace walls, and the forest beyond stirred as if whispering secrets of fate. A prophecy had spoken of their bond. Together they would awaken the throne or bring ruin to all who claimed it. And as they gazed at the horizon, both knew the journey was not over. The kingdom awaited, mysteries remained, and the world had yet to see the power of an Alpha and Omega bound not by law, but by choice, courage, and love. But for the first time, they faced the future not with fear, but with hope. The wind swept through the cliffs surrounding the kingdom of Vera, carrying whispers of an old curse. Moonlight spilled over the jagged stones, glinting off the blackened towers of the Alpha King's palace. Inside, golden chandeliers cast flickering shadows on the walls, but the halls were silent, save for the echo of hurried footsteps. Lyra, barely 18, clutched the small bundle of her belongings as she was led through the massive corridors. Her heart pounded against her chest like a drum of warning. The villagers had sold her to the palace, claiming her family's debts as payment. She had been terrified, but what frightened her most was not the unknown walls of the palace, but the man who waited there. Kale, the Alpha King. Kale was legend. They said he could bend the fiercest warriors to his will with a glance and silence the strongest men with a whisper. But beyond the stories, there was fear in the way even his closest soldiers avoided his eyes. Kale ruled not just with power, but with an unyielding presence that left no room for rebellion. Lyra's escort halted before the throne room doors. 2 guards opened them, and the girl stepped inside. Kyle stood there tall and commanding, his dark hair brushing the shoulders of his black armor. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, swept over her. She tried to hide her trembling hands, though her heart betrayed her courage. "You belong to no one," Kyle said, his voice low and steady, a command and a warning at the same time. "You are here because the law says you are mine, but your spirit, that I cannot own." Lyra met his gaze. She refused to bow. Fear clawed at her throat, but she lifted her chin. "I will not belong to anyone," she said, her voice small but firm. Kale's expression shifted. No one had ever dared speak like that to him. The words felt like fire, and a strange pull tightened in his chest. He studied her, noting the stubborn lift of her jaw, the spark in her eyes. She was sold to him, yet she carried the kind of defiance he had never seen before. Defiance, he murmured, almost to himself. Dangerous, yet intriguing. The palace air was thick with tension. Kyle motioned for the guards to leave them. Alone in the grand room, silence stretched, heavy and fragile. Lyra's pulse raced and Kale's sharp eyes followed every subtle movement. "Do you fear me?" he asked. "I fear nothing," she said, though a shiver ran through her. Kale stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. He did not touch her, but the air between them seemed charged, a storm waiting to break. "You are bold," he said, "but boldness in a palace is like a blade against stone. You will break." "I may break," Lyra admitted softly, "but I will not bow." For a moment, Kale felt something he had not in decades, a curiosity so intense it made his chest ache. Most people came to him afraid, ready to submit, to bend to the power he wielded. Lyra was different. She radiated a quiet strength that refused to be tamed. The night deepened and the moon climbed high above the palace. Kyle did not offer her a bed or a room. Instead, he brought her to a chamber that overlooked the forest below. The windows were tall and arched, and the moonlight spilled over her face. "You will sleep here tonight," he said, his voice softer now, almost gentle. "And tomorrow you will learn what it means to live in my kingdom." Lyra nodded, but she did not lower her gaze. She felt the weight of his stare, heavy and unyielding, but it did not frighten her. She was sold, yes, but she had not surrendered. Night crept into the corners of the chamber. Lyra sat by the window, staring at the dark forest below, feeling the wind brush her face. She thought of her village, her family, and the life she had lost, and yet beneath her fear, there was a strange thrill. She had entered a world of kings and curses, a place where danger walked as closely as desire. Outside, Kale stood in the shadows, watching her. His thoughts were a storm of conflict. He should command her obedience, demand her loyalty, but every instinct in him screamed against it. He wanted her defiance. He wanted her fire. And though he had declared she belonged to no one, a part of him ached at the thought of her leaving. Hours passed. The moonlight shifted, silvering the stone walls of the chamber. Lyra, despite her resolve, eventually curled into a corner of the room, exhausted by fear and uncertainty. Cale did not enter, but he did not leave either. He remained outside, pacing, torn between duty and desire, between the law of the Alpha and the pull of something deeper, something dangerous. Suddenly, a noise broke the stillness, a soft rustle from the hall outside. Lyra's head snapped up. Kyle's ears twitched, alert. Shadows moved, figures cloaked in black slipping through the halls toward her. "They come for you," Kyle said, appearing beside her without sound. His voice was calm, yet every word carried the weight of command. Lyra's eyes widened. "Who?" "Enemies of the crown," Cale said. "They would use your blood for power, to curse the kingdom. They do not know you, yet they know what you carry within." Lyra's stomach sank. She did not understand what he meant, but she felt the danger in the air, sharp and cold. Without a word, Cale extended his hand. Hesitation flickered in her eyes. Then, with the trust of someone who had nowhere else to turn, she took it. The moment her fingers brushed his, something shifted. A pulse of energy, subtle but undeniable, coursed between them. Cale felt it in his bones, a tether that was not possession, not dominance, but something older, something that whispered of destiny and fate. They moved together through the palace halls, silent and swift, avoiding the shadowy figures that sought her. The forest outside was near, the moonlight guiding them to safety. And yet, despite the urgency, Cale's mind could not stop turning over one thought. He could not let her go. At the edge of the forest, they paused. The moonlight bathed Lyra in silver, and she looked at him, fear and defiance mingling in her eyes. "Even if I survive," she whispered, voice trembling but strong, "I will never belong to you." Cale's jaw tightened. Every word struck him like a blade, yet beneath the sharpness there was awe, fascination, and longing. He had faced countless warriors, witches, and kings, but none had looked at him like she did, not with fear, not with defiance, not with the spark of life that refused to bow. "I do not ask for your belonging," Cale said, his voice low and dangerous. "But know this, I cannot let you walk away." Lyra's chest rose and fell rapidly. The night seemed to hold its breath. Shadows of the forest swayed in the wind, echoing the tension between them. Cale's eyes, gray and stormy, searched hers. There was power there, hidden yet potent, and he knew this night was only the beginning. From the darkness, a whisper of wind carried a warning. The shadowy figures had not given up. They would strike again. And Cale, for all his strength, could feel a new fear rising, the fear of losing her, of letting her slip into a world that might destroy her. And perhaps him. Lyra, despite her fear, stood tall. "Then you will have to chase me," she said, a faint defiance still lingering in her voice. Cale's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile, dangerous and commanding. "Oh, I will chase you," he said, and in the silver glow of the moon, a promise hung between them, a promise of pursuit, of challenge, and of something neither of them could name yet. The wind carried their shadows into the forest, and the night whispered of fate and fire, of bonds that might form not through ownership, but through choice, and of a danger neither had yet begun to understand. And in that moment, Cale knew one thing with terrifying clarity. He could not let her go.